All right, Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Welcome to the Great Reality Book Study. Um, so, you know, we are in, we'll be on page 27 tonight, and there's a solution. So far in this chapter, it's a rather unique chapter because the first 10 pages pretty much covers the obsession. And then it gets, well, it's actually the first 8 pages, 20, once it hits 25, it gets into the solution. And but we covered, pretty deeply the obsession, and we fact checked a bunch of slogans a couple weeks ago, and we discussed the common solution of 4 through 9. And tonight we're going to go a little bit deeper. And we're on page 27. Excuse me, allergies. So the official start date of Alcoholics Anonymous is June 10th, 1935, on the day that Robert Holbrook Smith met William Griffith Wilson. Actually, not met him, the day of Dr. Bot's last drink. That was a month before. Sorry about that mistake there. No, it was the day of Dr. Bot's last drink. Um, but the start date of AA can also be traced back to a meeting that took place in Zurich, Switzerland, and give or take the late, maybe 29 1929, or maybe early 30s. There's no real marking there, between Roland Hazard, a hopeless drunk who came from this prominent Rhode family, and we'll break that down too, and the world famous psychiatrist Dr. Carl Jung. And so let's see what it says in this big book. There's a certain American businessman had ability, good sense, and high character. So Roland was born into one of the most prominent families in Rhode Island. The Hazard family they have like really deep colonial roots in Rhode Island. It goes way back to like the 1600s. I mean, really far back. And they're early, that's the earliest settlers of the colony. His grandmother was Marguerite, and she is credited with forming and introducing the first kindergarten in America, which is quite fascinating. So the family is rather fascinating. I mean, his aunt was turn of the century. She was like president of Wesley College, and his father was president of Peacedale Manufacturing Company and president of Solvay Processing Company, two huge companies. And his grandfather was known as the father of American alkaline industry, and they own very, very, very profitable companies. Woolen Mills was the major producer of army blankets for the wars, you know, and what have you. So that was a big thing too. Um, and they also owned the nation's leading producer of ovens called Summit Solvay Company. Now they had a sister company called Solvay Process Company, which was like the first industrial chemical company, chemical manufacturers of sodium carbonate, which was, rather important. And they would go on to merge with three other chemical companies and create what's called Allied Chemical and Dye Corporation. Today it's called Allied Chemical, and it's worth over $30 billion. Huge company, Allied Chemical. And Rowan was a member of the board of directors of Allied until his death. And to say that Roland was born with a silver spoon in his mouth is an understatement. But like many other like rich families from that era, the Hazard family were big into teaching their children values, proper human relations to prepare for them for their business careers. It wasn't even like family etiquette, it's like about business. And they were also big on education, sending their children to like these best prep schools that taught moral discipline, social manners, and all that stuff. And Roland received a bachelor's degree from Yale. His nickname was at Yale was Rowdy Roland because of his drinking. And after Yale, he served in the Rhode Island State Senate. And during World War One, he was captain of the American Chemical Warfare Department, which most likely because it came up because his family was in the industry. But his drinking did not lead to his discharge from the service, even though it should have. So there's probably some strings pulled. But um, a lot of people wondered how, because remember, they had lots of money, you know. It didn't lead to his firing from any of the positions he held with the family corporations. His drinking was very much covered up. He had a bodyguard. He had a person that would follow him around. He had family members looking up after him, people doing his work and stuff like that. And, you know, you gotta remember, this is the days where alcoholics were looked as morally weak, and the last thing this prominent family wanted was a moral weakness exposed in their ranks, especially when you're dealing with backers and people that are bringing you money. And even though Roland was the oldest of the male children in the family, probably the most intelligent, and held several high-ranking positions within the company. When his father died, his father did not hand over the operations to him. His younger brother was named to run the estate. Um, and that kind of created this wedge between him and his brother. And his brother basically did it. All he could was, keep Roland kind of hidden. And Roland was kind of, he was still a business guy. They still took a lot of information from him. But he was he could smooth over backers and stuff like that they needed. And in 1927, on a trip to Africa, there's a safari trip. Generally, this is a trip that was reserved for royal and rich at the time, and the trip was an absolute disaster because of his extreme drunkenness, the spree he went on. Um, he was never invited back. But the reason why it was very significant is because now his drinking was exposed to their investors, family, friends, and result, was the family demoted him and threatened to cut him loose. They were putting in trains of the motion to basically strip him of his powers. So it was then Roland decided to do something that he'd been told for years to do and seek help. Let's go back to the book. It says, for years he had fallen from one sanitarium to another. So he went from one asylum to another. And I assume those are probably inebriate asylums, the ones where they had all this nice stuff they did to people in there. Shock therapy, whatever, violence, and it was nasty places. But he went from one sanitarium to another. The equivalent, as for equivalent of one rehab after rehab after rehab, right? Remember what I explained about, you know, again, the mindset happens to people when they go to these asylums. So it would take a toll on someone. He says he consulted the best known American psychiatrists. So the best psychiatrists in the US were very expensive. Psychiatry became very popular in the 1900s. And it was, those guys would just rack up the prices in there, right? There was no insurances, that helped you pay for it. Most rich folks could only afford to see one or two of them at the most because they were that expensive. But remember, his family had limitless money and also power. So he sought treatment from all the major psychiatrists in the United States, and none had anything that would work for him. Back to the book. Then he had gone to Europe, and this is 1931. Allegedly 1931, no one knows for sure. And placing himself in the care of the celebrated physician, the psychiatrist, Dr. Carl Jung, who prescribed for him. So after he ran into all these American psychiatrists, he went to Europe, and there's the big three. There's Freud, Adler, Jung. Now, Roland's first choice was Freud, who was ill. I don't know if that was his cocaine experiment he was doing at the time, maybe. Adler was too busy, is what he told him, and didn't like to work with alcoholics. Neither one of those guys did. So he went to Zurich, Switzerland to see Jung. Now, Roland had a cousin named Leonard Bacon, who was a, Pulitzer Prize winning poet. And he was a patient of Jung's. And for years, he kept saying at Christmas times and stuff, hey, I recommend you to go see this guy. And other members of the Hazard family had gone to Jung. Now weren't alcoholics. So Rollins, finally, he said he would never do it. He finally did it. But when he was at his lowest, he did it. He went to Jung, and Jung was considered perhaps the finest psychiatrist in the world, maybe of all time, because of the debts he had, the depths. You know, they say, like, if you look at Einstein, what Einstein was to science is what Jung was to psychiatry. And he believed that spiritual transformation through spiritual experience was absolutely necessary for the well-being of human life, so growth. We'll get more to that in a bit. But Rowan, he stayed with Jung for 1 year. You hear different stories. Maybe it wasn't quite 1 year. Who knows? But we're gonna go with the book here. But 1 year. And let's see what else it says in the book. Though his experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. His physical and mental condition were unusually good. So here's the red flag, big red flag. Above all, he believed, where do beliefs come from? They're handed to us, right? Believed he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden depths, hidden springs, that relapse is unthinkable. Like I mentioned, beliefs are handed to us. So he just thinks he hasn't experienced anything yet. He just believes, oh, I must have the information here. I mean, think about it. Did you ever go to rehab and do all the treatment stuff and relapse prevention and education and substance abuse prevention, whatever they give you, patterns and all that stuff, and think from all the info I got, there's no way I'm going to use again. I got this. You believe relapse is unthinkable. Look at his result. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. Hmm. So he felt he was more than fully ready to return home to the US, because he was convinced it solved his drink problem. And the solution was self-knowledge. You know, that was his salvation, self-knowledge. And he left, switched, Zurich by train and never made it past Paris. You know, back to the book. It's more baffling still. He could give himself no satisfactory explanation for his fall. Not only did not only, you know, did he believe he was never going to drink again, he knew everything. He thought he knew everything there was about drinking. He had no clue why he picked up all the information he had. He had no clue. So he returned to the doctor who he admired and asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things to regain self-control. He seemed quite rational and well balanced with respect to other problems, yet he had no control whatsoever over alcohol. Why was this? Well, we know why, right? But he begged the doctor to tell him the whole truth, and he got it. And the doctor's judgment, he was utterly hopeless. Hopeless, no hope. He could never regain his position in society, and he would have to place himself under lock and key or hire a bodyguard if he were expected to live long. That was a great physician's opinion. So that right there is one of the prognoses of alcoholics, hopelessness. Sounds like what Silkworth told Lois and Bill. Jung said, I have done everything I could do for you through psychiatry, medicine, and my knowledge, and I can do nothing more. But look what it says. This man still lives, and he is a free man. Remember what freedom is? It's where you no longer have restraints, stuff weighing you down, to be confined by self-will and misdirected instincts. He does not need to hire a bodyguard. Remember, he had one. Nor is he confined. He can go anywhere on earth where other free men may go without disaster. Here's a condition. We have conditions in this book, prerequisites, conditions. Here's a condition, provided he remains willing to maintain a simple attitude. That simple attitude is the fit spiritual condition as results of steps 4 through 9. That's a simple attitude I get. Is an attitude of where the fit spiritual wholeness. We get that from we continue that from what's 4 through 9 in step 10 and grow and maintain that simple attitude. It's all about repetition. It's all about repetition. Keep going and going and going. Back to the book. Some of our alcoholic readers may think we can do without spiritual help. Of course, alcoholics always believe that. That's the last thing I wanted to do. I tried everything there was. Rehab, church, psychiatry, tried all those. And the last thing I wanted to do was spiritual treatment. Let us tell you the rest of the conversation our friend had with his doctor. The doctor said, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. And chronic is reoccurring, persistent, ongoing, and long term. In the mind of a chronic alcoholic. You are a real alcoholic. Allergy obsession. I've never seen one single case recover where that state of mind exists to the extent it does in you. So he's seen these guys before, and he never was successful. And neither was Silkworth. Silkworth had 2% recovery rate, and he doubted of his 2% that got sober his allergy obsession, just telling him that. Silkworth. He said they probably weren't even alcoholics. And he says the same thing here. I have never seen one single case where that state of mind exists to the extent it does in you. So he's seen these guys before. Our friend felt the gates of hell close on him to claim. Remember that? So that's his diagnosis right there, right? I'm sorry. You have your prognosis. He said you basically, in so many words, you have an allergy, obsession, to alcohol. He didn't say that, but that's pretty much what we know. It's being laid out. So you go to the doctor, he has to give you a diagnosis. What's my chances here? Because I've never seen a single case recover where that mind exists in you. That's why the gates of hell slammed him. He said to the doctor, it's a typical alcoholics question, is there no exception? So he's asking, what can I do? And he's going to give him this a little healthier prognosis here. Yes, replied the doctor, there is exceptions to cases such as yours of occurrences early times, here and there, once in a while. So here and there, once in a while, sometimes, alcoholics have what are called vital spiritual experience. It might seem strange for a psychiatrist to prescribe a spiritual experience, but Jung recognized in order for an alcoholic to be set free, they needed direct conscious contact with higher power, spiritual experience, some type of that experience. And so the question is, why do you believe in spiritual experience? Why would you suggest anything to anybody unless you had one yourself? So as a child, he had a spiritual experience and numerous deep dreams afterwards that led him to realizing what spiritual experiences were. So as a child, he had them. There's no way anyone's going to suggest something as deep as a spiritual experience unless they've experienced it themselves, just like the steps. You know, Jung's father and several of his uncles are all clergymen, and his mother came from a spiritualist background, and she had visions, and she's also mentally ill too. But after his spiritual experience, his father became depressed, and Jung helped him to refine his faith again. And that's what spearheaded him into wanting to become a psychiatrist with spiritual approach. I mean, he studied Christianity, he studied Hinduism, very deeply Hinduism, Buddhism as well, Gnosticism, Taoism, very deeply. And he saw that spiritual life was the very root of the psychic life. That's what he believed. And that's what Freud and Adler didn't believe. Freud, they believed that spiritual experience would result of a deranged, insane mind. So Freud and Adler were not going to, we're not going to get into, they were going to teach him how to know your inner child. And we're going to talk about spiritual experiences. It's the right man for the job. They were never told Roland to seek a spiritual solution. If without this, it may have never existed. And Jung developed a very unique therapy called analytical therapy, and that help people better understand the conscious mind, their unconscious mind. So Jung believed there's 3 levels of consciousness: the conscious mind, the personal unconscious mind, and the collective unconscious mind. And so to put that into words, the best way I could describe it is the conscious mind is everything you're aware of. Oh, there's a door, there's a car, right? The personal unconscious mind are things we're not fully conscious of that have run through our lives that we haven't put it together yet. And then the collective unconscious is a deeper level of unconscious mind that it's not shaped through personal experience. It's shaped by spirituality. And he believed by bringing the conscious and the unconscious mind into balance, it helped the individuals become whole and become awakened by bringing conscious and unconscious together. It's kind of like this. It's a silly way to look at it. So the a typical conscious mind, you know, would see a doorknob. Oh, that's a doorknob, right? But how do you get to know? But to know how a doorknob works, you don't know until you open it up. And that's kind of like what he did. He would take a person and he would, you know, open their mind, to the conscious aspect of everything they see, but then he would get and tell them their story. As he would tell them their stories, he would point out patterns in their lives. Oh, this resentment's that fear, this fear. And then the unco the collective conscious part he brought into it was here's what here's the spiritual aspects to it. Let's look at what he says next in the book. To me, these occurrences are phenomena, unexplainable. So here's the best definition of psychic change that's in this book. If you ever want to take a policy to the steps, you want to say here's the definition of psychic change or spiritual conversion. Um, this is what you need. They appear to be in the nature of huge means massive, enormous, gigantic, emotional displacements. Now, displacement means to rid of, right? And rearrangements, that means something that's redone. Ideas, look at this part. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding force of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side. Doesn't say cope with or looked at, cast to one side. And a complete new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. You look at that, it's so deep right there. Emotional displacements and rearrangements. And that ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once which once guided us, you know, what we thought was all, there was, are cast on one side and a new set of conception was begin to dominate us. Look at your life, today and ask yourself, have you experienced this? Notice it doesn't say, like I said, cope with our old ideas and attitudes or learn them. No, it says cast out, right? And a new set of conceptions begin to dominate us. When we get a new set of conceptions and motives, we get a new attitude. The revolution begins. You know, out with the old and with the new. Let's see what else he says. In fact, I've been trying to produce such an emotional rearrangement within you. With many individuals, the methods I employ are successful, but I have never been successful with an alcoholic of your description. So he says it again to him. So he tried to produce the emotional rearrangement within him. He tried to produce some type of emotional rearrangement, um, but he was never successful with a alcoholic. So what was the methods within his stuff he tried? Um, the emotional rearrangement. There's a book called Modern Man in Search of His Soul by Carl Jung. Amazing book. One of those books you got to read like 3 times to just grasp it all. But he talks about how emotions influence a person's attitude. That negative emotions can be changed through awareness of what creates negative emotions, such as like targeting self-esteem. So he believed that looking at self-esteem as like high, where you think you're better than someone, or low, where you're less than, persuaded emotions to change through the awareness of that, changing the person's attitude. In other words, psychic change. This is just a theory of mine, but um, that the emotional rearrangement, that was what he was trying to do with Jung, was that self-esteem treatment. But that was the problem. He had never been successful as an alcoholic. In essence, Jung's attempt an emotional rearrangement on Roland was an attempt at soul surgery. And um and with attempted soul surgery, he was trying to do what Bill Wilson would lay out later in steps 4 and 5. With 4 and 5, Bill discovered a way into the inner workings of the person's driving forces to produce a psychic change. gaining awareness of, self-esteem and personal, all the instincts in there. The Calm Three, which is what Jung was probably trying to do with Roland. The difference is Bill was successful with the Rockaholics. Jung was not. Why? I mean, Roland, Bill was a Rockaholic. You know, when Roland, heard the word spiritual experience, look at what he instantly thought. Upon hearing this, he's telling me have a spiritual experience. Our friend was somewhat relieved, for reflected, after all, he was a good church member. This hope, however, was destroyed by the doctor telling him, while your religious convictions were very good, and in his case did not spell necessary vital spiritual experience. So Jung believed a direct experience with higher power was absolutely imperative, was more important than just belief or doctrine or dogma. What Jung was very respectfully saying, well, you're a good church member, your religious beliefs are good, and you do nice things for your church. Those religious beliefs and ideas will not give you the necessary spiritual conversion and awakening the alcoholic desperately needs to overcome alcoholism. Being a Sunday church worshiper isn't enough. Church membership do won't do it if you wish, to overcome this deep, ugly disease. He needed some type of deep-seated spiritual centered principles to live by. He needs to be rocketed into a different dimension. And another explanation of this is on page 93. Let's go there really quick. And it explains kind of what he's saying. And this is talking about it when you get that eager prospect who, might know the Bible or spiritual, tenets more than you do, so to speak, religious tenets. It says your prospect may belong to religious denomination. Your religious education and training may be far superior than yours. In that case, he's going to wonder how you can add anything to what he already knows. But he will be curious to learn why his own convictions have not worked and why yours seem to work so well. He may be the example of the truth that faith alone is insufficient. So that's kind of like what the guy was telling him there. To be vital. What does vital mean? To have life, to have life. Faith must be accompanied by self-sacrifice, unselfish, that's step 12, constructive action, 4 through 9. Let him see you're not there to instruct him in religion. I mean, he probably knows more about it than you do. But to call attention the fact, however deep his faith and knowledge, he cannot apply it, or he would not have drank. I mean, you think about how many people go to church and only believe, you know, how many know about God rather than know God. Millions believe, not many know God. And we need that aspect in us. That's why we have these steps. So many would rather know about God. I mean, imagine if millions and millions knew God. It'd be a different world. Go back to 28 where we're at. So here's his dilemma, or his terrible dilemma. Here was the terrible dilemma in which our friend found himself when he had extraordinary experience, which, as we have already told you, made him a free man. So Jung suggested to Rowan to have a vital spiritual experience, to need to find a religious movement to lead him to such an experience. So he returned to the United States. Now, there's a lot of misconception that he just joined the Oxford group. That's not true. He returned to the U.S. and sought the help of the Emmanuel Movement's Courtney Baylor. So Courtney Baylor, I mentioned when I did the history at the beginning of this book study. Baylor's an extraordinary guy. He was an alcoholic as well. And the Emmanuel Movement was a spiritual movement. They may not have understood the disease a lot well, but Baylor left that movement and he was a lay therapist for them, like a sponsor almost like, and then he became a trained therapist to them, and then then got all his degrees and left them. But the methods Baylor used were psychological and spiritual. Baylor did not use the word recovery. He used the word reconstruction. And he knew a person had to like rethink and remake themselves, put themselves back together again if he were to escape this disease. So his therapeutic style, involves spiritual discovery, a big emphasis on confession, self-disclosure. And get this, the tool Baylor used was he called moral inventory. There's no moral inventory within the Oxford group, just confession. So that was a tool he used, and I have no idea what the moral inventory consisted of. Again, I'll tell you one of my Stevens theories here. I think um, Baylor's a super intelligent guy, and he had a Jung-like approach, and I believe that his moral inventory could very well have been very similar to what Bill presents in this book. Um, Roland was a very intelligent guy too. Roland would pass that on to Ebby, and then Ebby to Bill. This is a theory. But Baylor's first phase of therapy lasted 2 months, and then he would go on to like a second phase and a third phase and stuff, and could last up to a year. During the second phase, Baylor would suggest to his clients to find a strong religious movement, if not the Emmanuel movement, something else. But since Baylor's no longer associated with the Emmanuel movement, he probably most likely suggested the Oxford group, and Roland would go to the Oxford group. I don't know that for sure that that's was his suggestion, but Roland was able to have an awakening when he was doing the Baylor steps treatment along with the Oxford group. He would stay sober. Jung planted the seeds, but I believe it was Baylor that helped sober him up and sent him to the Oxford group. If you look up Baylor and read about him, you'll read a lot. There's a lot more to it. That stuff he did, Courtney Baylor. This shows, that a direct link between not just the Oxford group and A, but the Emmanuel movement. And Emmanuel was very kind of pushed down to the ground. Very, very important early Alcoholics Anonymous. Let's go to page 9, Bill's story. And so Roland I'm still the book that they're talking here. It says, we read this a few weeks back. It says, I was aghast, talking about Evie. So that was it last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little crackpot about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the boy was on fire, all right, but bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, his gin would last longer than his preaching. But he did no ranting. Matter of fact way, he told how two men had appeared in court, persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. So in August 1934, Roland with Shep Cornell and Seba Graves, along Seba's father was a judge, was presiding over an acquaintance of theirs named Ebby Thatcher. Seba's father saw what the Oxford group had done for his son, so he put Ebby in Roland's care. That wasn't unheard of. What was unheard of was Ebby had been committed before, and once you were committed, you went back in if you got caught. He was usually, it was very hard to jump through those hoops, but he did. But Roland would take Ebby, up in the mountains supposedly, and take him through the Oxford Group principles. Part of the Oxford Group program was giving back to others, passing it on, and they did it in a very unique way. And let's say that Richard, taking Richard to the steps, the Oxford Group principles. And when we're done, I would say, do you know anyone that you could help from this? Someone you're really close to? And he would say, yeah, sure. I know this guy, Steve, blah, blah, blah. And that's who we take it to. Bring the message to him. That's the way they set in motion. But after a couple months sober, Roland asked Ebby to do the same thing. And he said, is there someone you could help? His old friend, William Griffith Wilson, Bill Wilson. So Ebby in turn would bring the Oxford Group principles and probably some other stuff too, because there's a lot of stuff that Ebby brought to him that weren't Oxford Group, and spearheaded the AA movement. Roland never joined Alcoholics Anonymous. and he stayed active in the Ox group all the way through the 40s, for quite a while. I mean, as long as the drunk squad was there, I mean, I didn't think it ever really went away. And he would visit AA members at the clubhouse, play poker and stuff like that in Manhattan. But they never joined him. And the main reason he never joined AA was he ran that drunk squad after a while. And when lots of those guys that were powerhouses went to AA, he thought he needed to keep it together. And when the big book was published in 39, he had been sober 8 years. And Roland, he died December 20th, 1945. And he was running Bristol Manufacturing Company at the time, which was the highest grossing company they had. And he was president of the company. He died sober. He was 64 years old. So, Jung's contribution to the evolution, we'll call it, of Alcoholics Anonymous it's a critical piece. And it further shows us the AA program is not just a product of one or two men. With Jung's spiritual change and sober's knowledge, help provide the basis of the steps. So in 61, Bill wrote a letter to Jung. I'm not going to read the whole letter because it's rather long, but I'm going to go down to the meat of it and just read you towards the end of the letter. Let me get there real quick. Yeah, here it goes. And he's just closing up the letter here. It says, so do you, after he tells him about Roland and what happened, blah, blah. So he says, so do you and Dr. Shoemaker, Father Shoemaker and of the Oxford group, to William James and our physician, Dr. Silkworth. We have own a tremendous benefaction, as you will now clearly see. This astonishing chain of events actually started long ago in your consulting room. It was directly founded upon your own humility and deep perception. Very many thoughtful AAers, students of your writings, because of your conviction that man is something more than intelligent. Man is something more than intellect, emotions, and $2 worth of chemicals. You have especially endeared yourself to us. How our society grew, developed its traditions for unity, instructed functioning will be in the texts and pamphlets material I am sending you. You will also be interested to learn that in addition to the spiritual experience, many AAers report a variety of psychic phenomena, the cumulative weight of which vary considerable. Other members follow the recovery and AA, which have helped. If you have been intrigued by the I Ching and your remarkable introduction to that work, please be certain to your place in the affection and in the history of our fellowship like no other. Gratefully yours, William G. Wilson. It's interesting he brings up the I Ching, and the I Ching, it's ancient Chinese philosophy. So ancient Chinese philosophy book, and it's for obtaining spiritual guidance, insight, wisdom, decision making, resolve conflict, human betterment, relationship problems, whatever there is, and greatly influenced Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, even Christianity. Jung loved it. And these early A guys loved those books. They loved them. So Jung wrote back to him, and I'm not going to read the whole one too because it's really long, but it's rather cool. He says, I strongly convince that evil principles pervading in this world leads to unrecognized spiritual need into the principle of it. Hold on one second. Sorry, you got my kids like making noise. Says consumed either by religious insight or by the productive wall of human community, an ordinary man not protected by the action and above, isolated in society, cannot resist the power of evil. This is Jung talking, which called very aptly the devil. But the use of such words arouse many mistakes that can only keep a man much as possible. Get out of here. Hold on a second. God, sorry. Since these are the reasons why I would not give a full significant explanation of Roland H, but I'm risking it with you because I concluded you are very decent and honest letter, that you have acquired a point of the misleading platitudes one would usually about alcoholism. You see, alcohol in Latin word is spiritus. Use the same word, the highest religious experience as well as the most depriving poison. And the helpful formula therefore, spiritus concrete spiritualism. Thanking you again for the kind letter, Dr. Carl Jones. It just shows you, how deeply it goes there, you know. Let's go back to 28 really quick and we're gonna close this out. He says, we in turn sought the same escape of all desperation of drowning men. I don't know if there's anyone here that's ever almost drowned. I know I almost did twice. And when you're drowning, you have two options. One is drown, and the other is to find a way out. And when you're not, when you're trying not to drown, what do? You grasp at anything. You're in desperation. Desperation is you've lost all hope, hopeless. And that frame of mind, you're going to do anything to get you out of the situation. So if you are drowning and a life raft is thrown to you without question, you're not going to say, I wonder if this is the right color, or, no, you grab it without question and you hold it tight. The big book is our life raft, right? And we hold it tight, and we know it's the life raft that worked for others. When we're hopeless, and desperate, we'll grab hold on anything, and we do without question. So he's asking us to take the steps of the drowning man. So it's not something you can manufacture yourself. You know what I mean? And I actually love what it says next. What seemed at first a flimsy reed has proved to be a loving hand of God. If you're on a life raft and the waterfall's approaching and you're either going to go down and die, you're gonna, you see that flimsy reed, you don't say to yourself, that won't work. I need something stronger, bigger. No, you're gonna grab it, that flimsy reed, reach out and grab it. It's your only option. But I love that. That's the way we looked at God, as a flimsy reed. It's not that, a new life isn't given us. If you prefer design of living that works in rough going, design living is steps 4 through 9. The distinguished American psychiatrist William James, in his book Various Religious Experience, indicates the multiple ways which men have discovered God. So in Bill's spiritual experience, Abby brought in this book in the hospital. It's a very interesting book and a very hard read. So we have no desire to convince anyone there is only one way which faith can be acquired. If what we have learned and felt I'm sorry, if what we have learned and felt and seen means anything at all, it means that all of us, whatever our race, color, or creed or color, are children of a loving creator with whom we may form a relationship upon simple, understandable terms. So here's the condition, simple condition, as soon as we are willing and honest enough to try. Think about that. How long does it take you to get that honesty and willingness? Willingness is to be ready. Honesty is to be honest with where I'm at, the awareness of where I'm at, and look yourself in the mirror and go, I'm hopeless. It says those having religious affiliations will find nothing disturbing about our beliefs and ceremonies. There's no friction among us, such matters. We think that no concerns of ours, what religious bodies or members identify themselves with as individuals. This should be an entirely personal affair, which each one decides for himself in the light of our past associations or present choice. Not all religious bodies but most of us favor such memberships. In the following chapter, there appears to be an explanation of alcoholism, more about alcoholism. As we understand it, then a chapter addressed the agnostics. We agnostics. We get there pretty soon. Many who once were in that class are now among our members. Surprisingly enough, we find that such convictions no great obstacle to a spiritual experience. Further on, clear-cut directions, or clear-cut, clear, precise, are given showing how we recovered. These are followed by 42 personal experiences. Each individual and his personal stories describes in his own language, from his own point of view, his own experience, how they stopped drinking. No, it says the way the established relationship with God. That is a great roadmap to share a meeting. I mean, people say, I'm going to share my experience, strength, and hope. And that means well, but it's gotten so watered down, or people say, I'm going to talk about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. There's no there's no it in this big book. It says what I was like, what happened, and what I am like now. But if you do that part, what I was like, along with, how I experienced relationship with God, that's the way the guys share their meetings. In the Doc Bob Good Old Timers, Dr. Bob says, we do not need to talk about it drinking. Let's see what it says here. These give a fair cross-section to our membership and a clear-cut idea what has actually happened in our lives. It says, we hope no one will consider these self-revealing accounts in bad taste. Our hope is that many alcoholic men and women, desperately indeed, will see these pages, and we believe that it is only by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems that they will be persuaded to say, yes, I am one of them too. I must have this. Anyone ever say that? Some may say that, but do not do the work. Say, I must have this. I'll do whatever I can, but don't do the work. How many times you got in the sponsee and you have that pre-step one meeting and meanwhile, and you go over the first couple steps and they're just not interested after that. It's, that's why we keep going. So, the powerfulness of this story stands out the most is you have this guy who stays this guy for 1 year and he thinks he's absorbed everything this guy has to offer. Yet his obsession of the mind didn't, was more powerful than that. And then he finds out that, just being a Sunday church member isn't enough. You need a direct experience with God. But as far as I know, only the steps will give you. There's other ways to make it happen. You can go to church and have a spiritual experience, but how are you going to recreate that? How are you going to recreate that? I'll tell you a quick story. So there's this guy. This is a great example of the steps. There's this guy, and he's got he inherited, he got $1 million, and all these people show up to his house, and they're partying down at his house every weekend. And then the money runs out, and all the friends go away. And he's sitting there, no alcohol, no drugs, no friends. And except he's sitting next to the safe, and he spins it. Spinning the wheel on the safe board. And one day it just goes pop and opens up. $1 million is in the safe. And he goes, all right, I'm gonna take $500,000 and keep 500,000 in the safe. So he closes the door of the safe. All the friends show back up and they do everything and they leave and money's gone. And he goes, I got $500,000, but the problem is he doesn't know the combination to the safe. With the steps, we always know the combination to the safe. We can always recreate what happened to us. We can have spiritual experiences in different ways, but how can you recreate it again and again and again and again and again and again? So next week we'll do more about alcoholism. I'm gonna stop the recording.